Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. And today, we're finally doing the video that you guys have been asking for a while, where we talk about World of Warships, and we answer some of the many questions you guys have sent us about that game. So first of all, today's video is sponsored by World of Warships Legends. I want to put that out there. Just as full disclosure, I still intend to answer these questions as accurately as possible. That said, if you're watching this video on an electronic device and you're interested in battleships, you would probably enjoy playing this game. This game is probably up your alley, so if you don't yet, what's going on? World of Warships Legends is available on consoles and mobile. If you do, let us know what ship you're playing right now in the comment section down below. A common question I get is, how realistic is the mission set? And honestly, if we had filmed this video a couple of months ago, my answer would have been, most of the missions aren't that realistic. You're fighting over zones of control, which is a fine gamey way to conceptualize why ships are fighting in a certain battle space. Why were the American and Japanese Navy fighting over Iron Bottom Sound? Because that is essentially the zone of control for resupplying the American beachhead on Guadalcanal. There wasn't actually a glowing ring in the ocean, but whichever navy had ships there in control of it was able to resupply their troops. So it's a fine gamey way of doing that, but the idea of battling to destruction inside of these rings it doesn't really have as much basis in reality. It's not a video game asset that you can have blown up this battle and then go back to the loading screen and jump into another battle with the exact same ship back to full health. So these battles of annihilation that you see in this game just aren't all that accurate. However, World of Warships Legends is now adding a game type called War Tales, which gives you a much more accurate mission and an objective to go after that isn't just a glowing patch of ocean in the same way. And that makes the game feel more realistic for me, getting these types of missions. For example, there's one where you're escorting HMS Vanguard, and she's largely disabled for the sake of gameplay, so it's the player ships that are doing all the work. But those sorts of escorting a much slower, weaker thing. That's what World War II naval combat is all about, is escorting other ships around, and something that many video games just don't include. So when you think of the ships that are escorting critical supplies or troops to invasion beaches, or a country's gold reserves after that country's been conquered by an enemy to overseas colonies, that sort of objective feels really historically accurate to me. Much like fighting over the convoy lanes in the Arctic. That's something that was a huge part of the Battle of the Atlantic. Or fighting against the Japanese to get from one point to another and seeing them attack you with increasingly more powerful types of ships. That perfectly matches Japan's pre-war doctrine to wear down an attacking fleet. I really like these War Tales game types, and it makes the game feel more historically accurate to me. Probably the most common question I get asked is, what is my favorite ship to play? What's my favorite ship type to play? What's my favorite nation to play? I tend to prefer to play the American line. That's always where I start in games like these, is with the American line. Those are the ships that I know the best. And then oftentimes I'll get what I want there, and then I'll go over to the Japanese line or the British line or something like that. But the American line is always my favorite one to start off with. The type of ship I like to play, I know I'm supposed to answer battleships and New Jersey specifically. World of Warships Legend does have New Jersey as a premium ship in it. I really like, my guilty pleasure ship to play is actually cruisers. The battleships, especially American battleships, are just too slow. You can't do anything with them, and you have to be really, really good at leading a target. That's part of why we're down here in forward main battery plot with the computers that aim the ship's guns. And the device that you play World of Warships on is going to be significantly more powerful than this computer right here. But it's not really calculating lead for you. You're doing that all up here. And my Mark I computer is not very good at calculating lead at those extreme long ranges that battleships have to use because it takes them so long to get into the fight. So I really like playing as cruisers. Even those battleships which are supposed to be fast, like New Jersey, fastest battleship ever built, in the game, her max speed getting her stock is like 27 knots. It's not the 33 knots that she was designed to do, or the 35 knots that she actually attains at one point. So not only are battleships already slow, but the game slows them to fit them down into a certain play style. Battleships are supposed to be the slow but heavily armored, heavily gunned warships. Destroyers are the glass cannons that are lightly armored, but with their torpedo armament can do outsized damage. And these classifications aren't inaccurate, but cruisers being somewhere in the middle where I can get up into a fight, I can engage things at long range, you can delete some light ships with single salvos, and you do have enough armor to take a hit from most things. So I really like that, just for the type of play style that I like to do. I'm too impatient to wait for my battleship, especially my slow American battleship, to get to the front. Honestly, this is going to be a kind of ridiculous answer. My favorite ship to play right now is the American light cruiser Omaha, because there are guns everywhere. No matter how I turn that ship, I've got a couple of guns bearing on the enemy. And that probably tells you more about my unsophisticated play style than it does anything else. But I like the ship's speed. She doesn't have a whole heck of a lot of armor, but she's often fighting other unarmored cruisers or destroyers because the battleships at that tier are too slow to get anywhere near her. She's just got guns pointing in all directions. So no matter what direction somebody comes at me from, I've got a couple of guns already pointed that way. Probably the second most common question I get asked is, how do I feel about games like World of Warships, or World of Warships in particular, featuring, I'm going to call them fantasy ships, but I'm putting that in quotes for this video, ships that were never completed. I'm actually, and I suspect people don't expect this answer from me, but I'm actually a really big fan of quote-unquote fantasy ships, both from a video game design point of view. You know, many countries just don't have ships that fit into like the certain tier-based peg holes that you need for making a balanced game. So finding designs that were come up with but were never actually authorized or built or completed to slot in there really makes sense. Think of Germany during World War II. They've got some super weak cruisers, like the K-class cruisers with 9 6-inch guns that are significantly lighter and smaller than cruisers that other nations are building. And then you've got either the Panzer ships or the Admiral Hipper class heavy cruisers, and there's nothing in between there. So you go from one of the worst cruisers of World War II to some of the most powerful cruisers of World War II with nothing in between. So I actually like that the game has included things to make the gameplay more balanced, but also I like that it's bringing attention to these real-world designs that were never completed. When you've been studying naval warfare as long as I have, like the traditional completed ships, you've already read everything about all of them. So you start to look at the ships that were never built, your Montanas and your first South Dakota class, your Lexington class battle cruisers, things like that. And those ships are in some ways cool because they represent a what could have been. I really like that the game includes them, and I like even more that the game is making people aware that these designs exist, so it's not just the super nerds like me that know about them. Now, one thing that naval historians like myself and gamers, where we need to find reconciliation, is in the games, these ships are given names. It doesn't make sense that you've got all of your ships in your American cruiser line named after their actual real-world lead of ship class, and then you've got this unbuilt ship, let's say the light cruiser Phoenix, and then you're naming it Design C or something like that. So it makes sense that names need to be applied to these ships, but us historians still know about them as their design instead of as their ship name. So historians like myself need to do a better job of figuring out what USS Maine is, any of these sorts of things. And gamers, I would love it if they could refer to their ship as, oh, I love playing as Maine, which represents one of the Montana class designs, something like that. Another series of questions I get is relating to gameplay and how realistic it is. And I mean, somebody could design a game that was super realistic where for fire control you've got a computer like this where you're putting in all these different inputs, but that would be an overwhelming game. Or it could be a perfect simulation where your guns do take a minute to reload, or like it could take forever to sail into the battle area, or you could get to the battle area and then realize you don't have enough fuel and have to go back to a refueling ship. Like, that is not fun gameplay. World of Warships is not a simulator, and that is a good thing. It has some aspects of gameplay that are more of what I would call an arcade style, in that the game drops you right in a battle. And that's a good thing because it's putting you in that action part of a ship's life, as opposed to the 99% of the time when she's just sailing around with nothing going on. I don't want to play a video game where I'm staring up through binoculars at empty ocean for hours and hours and hours, waiting to maybe see a periscope. So some aspects of ships are kind of gamified. Like I said, Iowa-class battleship speed is reduced to make them fit more into their tier better. Some things are gamified in the other direction. The rate of fire of many of these ships' guns is either increased much faster than it should be, or it's at its like highest rate of fire. For example, an Iowa-class battleship can, in theory, fire one round every 30 seconds. But in practice, after the first couple of shots, your guys start to get tired and you just can't keep up with that. The ship takes damage, and you're definitely not going to be able to maintain that rate of fire. And the game just maintains that constant rate of fire. But as a game, that sort of consistency is important, and I don't hold that against the game design. Other things, the game gets really, really well. So for example, when the guns turn to point at a target, the rangefinders also turn to point at a target, and that shows some really sophisticated modeling of the ships involved that many other naval games I've played just don't include. I absolutely love that. Likewise, leading your target is very important, and the types of armor and shells that you're firing is extremely important to gameplay, and that is a really great innovation of this type of game. That the armor is so well modeled. In fact, some folks from Wargaming came out and used some of the blueprints that we have here at Battleship New Jersey Museum. This is close to a decade ago, when they were starting to model the Iowa-class battleships that eventually showed up in the game. And that level of attention to detail is the sort of thing that gets a historian like me to fall in love with something. And a final question that we get asked very often relating to World of Warships is, you can customize your World of Warships ship. Did you have that kind of control over your ship as, say, I've just been made the commanding officer of New Jersey? Can I change the paint on it and start swapping out gun systems and things like that? This is one of those yes and no's. Oftentimes, there will be a big Navy-wide doctrine if your ship is operating in this area of operations, the North Pacific or the South Atlantic, or something like that. So they would choose the camouflage scheme that was most relevant to the area of operations, and a memo would go out to the whole fleet that the next time you're coming into port, you're repainting to X or Y camouflage scheme. There is a little bit of leeway to that sort of thing. For example, the documents that show you how you're camouflaging the ship don't really show you every surface, so you're kind of deciding, well, is the deck here where it's under an overhang going to be painted blue or gray? But again, that doesn't usually fall to the captain to micromanage. That's often something that the first lieutenant or the chief bosun's mate in the deck division are going to be determining. That said, there's certainly instances of this happening. For example, during the early part of the Battle of the Atlantic, German ships painted their turret tops yellow so that the Luftwaffe could identify their ships really easy. Well, then some British captains start to paint their turret tops yellow to confuse the Luftwaffe. And this sort of initially starts without specific orders. And then likewise, some of the German commanding officers start to paint their turret tops different colors. Again, this probably starts without specific orders. And so the Luftwaffe now knows that they're bombing ships with yellow turret tops because they're actually British instead of German. So like there is an amount of that that's happening, but it's not the most realistic thing. Likewise, a ship's armament is usually determined by what the Navy prescribes weapon-wise. That said, Willis Lee was just going around adding any aircraft guns to every ship he could, kind of without big Navy's explicit permission. So there is an amount of this. And then you see ships like USS Yorktown at the Battle of Midway. Her 50 caliber guns get traded out for 20 millimeter guns, but Captain Buckmaster never turns his 50 cals in, so she goes to Midway with like a double anti-aircraft battery, the new 20 millimeters that have been installed, and the 50 cals that her crew has sort of jury-rigged mounting points along the railing for on the ship. So there is some of this, especially with lighter weapons like anti-aircraft stuff. There's also a certain amount of experimentation. A captain thinks that, hey, if I add this system, it'll be a good idea. Now, where World of Warships is really accurate with this sort of thing, it's when you're doing the upgrades and the commander skills and those sorts of things to your ship, because a captain does come in and say, you know, we've got the time to train on anti-aircraft guns or damage control procedures. I'm going to focus on damage control procedures. The anti-aircraft guns are only going to get us so far. And so you see ships like New Jersey becoming really crack damage control ships, or really crack engineering ships that attain a higher speed than their sister ships, even though they're all built identically. Likewise, Iowa becomes the crack gunnery ship of the class and has the most accurate guns because that's what they choose to focus on. So there is an amount of, hey, I'm really going to focus on training for this, and then that's going to make my ship better at it. And you do get to see this in World of Warships. And I like that even though multiple players in a game can have an Iowa-class battleship, they're not all the same. The guy who's been playing his Iowa longer has been able to invest more into it, and it's a little bit better. And they are going to have different skill sets that they're optimized in. One might be doing better long-range gunnery. One might have gone for a more maneuverable ship that can turn tighter. Like, that is really cool. And I hope that you guys take the time to visit multiple ships, especially like the Iowa class. There's 4 of these left. Or the Fletcher class. There's 3 of them on display in the US. Or the Essex class aircraft carriers. There's 4 of them out there. And you go and you visit these ships and you realize, yeah, they're all sister ships. Every single one of them is completely different. And World of Warships gives you that feeling, and I think it's quite appropriate. You know, the major stuff is the same. An Iowa-class battleship is going to have a 16-inch gun. A Cleveland-class cruiser is going to have a 6-inch gun. But how they use them, what they're able to do with them, is going to be completely different from ship to ship and from commander to commander. So those are some of my thoughts on World of Warship Legends. Remember to let me know what ship that you're playing right now in the comment section down below, or what ship you'd like to play as if you don't currently play the game. And if you don't currently play the game, but you're into battleships like this, what are you doing? There's a link in the description below if you'd like to download the game, and you'll get a welcome pack with a lot of premium options in it. My favorite, you get the Tier 3 Battleship Arkansas. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, as well as a number of other businesses and private individuals like yourselves. For today's video, we'd like to thank World of Warships Legends for sponsoring our episode. Again, link in the description below if you'd like to take a look at that game. It's definitely worth checking out. You can also support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people find about the museum and our channel. Thanks for playing.